Today, I want to talk about the paradox of homeschooling. Anyone who is a mother understands that motherhood can be the most rewarding thing you can do, but it can also be the most challenging. And I think home-centered education is very similar in that it can be both rewarding and challenging. Its difficulty level is based on a different number of factors, including the individual student, so your child, the teaching approach that you're using, and whether that fits their unique style, and then different resources that are available. And resources could also be human resources, meaning, are you doing this by yourself completely? Do you have a supportive family system, even if they're not hands-on engaged in it, that they support your decision? Because then that's also another factor. Do you have a community? Do you have a co-op, right? Do you have people who are supporting you? So coupled with all those different factors, I'm just going to be honest, it can be hard. Like anything we do, anything that's worth it, sometimes it's hard. So what I want to lean into is the benefits and talk a lot about the rewards and the challenges. And then maybe we'll jump into some what to do because I'm all about practicality and I love to share tips and insights to help people to go on the journey that they believe that they were called to go on. So the first will be personalized learning. One of the benefits of home-centered education is the ability to tailor and customize education to our children's needs. And that's so beautiful because when I first started homeschooling my kids, I have a 7-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 9-month-old. When I started teaching math, I said, wow, my two children who are fairly similar learn so differently, right? One needs a mastery approach where teach me one time, let me master it, don't talk to me about it again. I got it, I remember it. Where the other child, once I move on to another concept, they need the spiral method, which is where you reintroduce previous concepts to refresh their memory. And I thought to myself, if I have only two children at that time, if I only have two children and their learning styles are so different, how difficult it has to be for a teacher who's trying to teach 15, 25, 35, 45 kids with different learning styles, different personal things happening at home, different skill levels, how hard it must be for them to be able to tailor information where everyone can benefit from it, right? Where one child's not bored out of their mind because they mastered that concept 2 months ago, just based on their family or maybe like some extracurricular they're doing outside, but how hard it must be. So that's one of the benefits, the personalized learning where it's not based on a grade system and everyone does not have to move together. You may have a kid who has mastered multiplication, division, fractions, and decimals. So they're on maybe a 4th grade level, but in reading, they're on a higher or lower level, right? But you get to personalize that. And I think that's a beautiful thing. The other thing I personally love about home-centered education is flexibility. Flexibility in that if I need to take time off, which I really do, I can, but also flexibility in the where. It does not have to be at a desk all the time. It does not have to be, in the house. It could be on the train, in a car, on a beach, anywhere. That flexibility is really beneficial in terms of the location, but also outside of being able to choose where learning happens, you can choose when learning happens and even how it happens. Maybe there's a course that you do in community or in a co-op or you outsource that course because you don't want to teach it or you feel like it's a better experience for them to do it in a different setting. So I love that. The time commitment is something that can be challenging if you don't constantly renew your mind and unlearn what you knew before. So I remember when I first started, I was like, okay, bringing the desk home. They're going to work for X amount of hours because that's what they always did until I realized, yes, you need 30 to 45 minutes to teach a kid, to teach several kids math. You're really only doing one concept. So if I am teaching one child and they've mastered that concept or they understood enough for one day in 5, 10, or 15 minutes, why do I think that I need to operate for 30 to 45 minutes just to check a box? I don't, and I won't. So I don't do that anymore. Um, one thing I would talk about is curriculum. I know, I don't want to say back in the days, but previously, like the pioneers and the trailblazers of home-centered education, they did either an eclectic style where they just kind of like pulling things together and doing what works, or using very limited resources. Now we have tons of resources, which to some aspect, it's really, really good because you get to choose what works, you get to choose the method, the philosophy, the approach. At the same time, that can be so overwhelming. If you don't have a framework in mind where you know what works for you, you've already made the decision and gone through the decision fatigue and the analysis paralysis, all of that, it can be so challenging to not be drawn to the shiny object syndrome, which means the new thing or the thing that you just learned about, or let me try this, right? Because consistency is important. You don't want to keep switching because you found out about something new or something seems better, right? The grass always looks greener on the other side. But the same token, you shouldn't stick to something just because you thought it was going to work. If it's not working, then maybe we need to move on, trade it, sell it, whatever. But the reason I brought up resources because I remember going to a supermarket and I'm like, all right, let me just pick up some detergent. This will be easy. And I'm like, oh my gosh, do I want the lavender scent? Do I want the vanilla? Do I want the flowers? Like, what scent do I want? And it was such a long process, and because of the information overload. So sometimes having too many resources can really get you to a point of making it hard to make decisions. And sometimes the availability of resources that you want may be an issue because you may not always be able to just go into a bookstore and find a homeschool curriculum that whereas you'd probably have to order a bunch of stuff online and then see what works. So, that can be um, a factor. I rarely talk about socialization only because I think that is such a myth about homeschools and home-centered educators not being good about socializing their kids. I don't think so at all. In fact, I feel like our kids get to socialize in different and diverse settings because they're at home. So that may mean my kids go to the bank with me. When I go to the library, instead of me checking out a book for them, I'm sending my child to go speak to the librarian. They're hanging out with kids at the park where their ages. They're in either a community or a group or some setting where hanging out with kids their ages, but they're also hanging out with intergenerational people, right? So it could be a grandmother that they're spending time with. It could be um, someone else's mom or someone else's dad or someone else's baby sibling. So I think that really helps to just kind of dispel that myth that because you're socialized at home, then you're awkward or you're weird. Like I think that's such a myth. Um, Luckily, I live in New Jersey and we don't have a lot of legal requirements. It is a very flexible state. But for my listeners in Pennsylvania, I know that there are so many requirements that you need to make sure that you're following and make sure that you're understanding and complying with those regulations. So that can be something that makes it a little bit hard. But once you get through it and you lean into the support of our amazing resources like CHAP, the Christian Homeschool Association of Pennsylvania, then I'm sure you'll be in great hands and you won't have to worry about that too much. Patience and adaptability is definitely one thing. It's going to require your patience. It's going to require you to adapt and pivot as you figure out things that you are trying to figure out for the first time on your own. And then it's a long-term commitment. Like for most of us, we've decided that we're in it for the long haul, right? So it's not like, oh, I'm just trying this out for a semester and see what happens. And if that's your case, then I get that. But for those who have already decided that you're going to do it for a longer time, whether it's through elementary or through high school or whatever you've decided, it's a big chunk of time. So again, challenging, rewarding, sacrificial, beneficial, absolutely, all the things in one. So, whether homeschooling is perceived as hard really depends on the individual circumstances and the commitment of the parents and the support systems that are in place. Many families find that it can be rewarding and successful, even though you're going to face challenges. So most times people say, is it hard? I just say yes, because it's a short, quick, honest answer. But at the same token, something being hard does not mean that you shouldn't do it. And it doesn't mean that it's not rewarding. So it's really situation by situation, but those are some of the paradoxes of homeschooling. Um, some other things I would talk about would be isolation versus independence. If you have decided to do it alone, like outside of a community, outside of a co-op, or outside of a state where it's really popular and thriving, then that provides a high degree of independence for students. At the same time, there may be a little bit of isolation in terms of learning with one person or another sibling versus in a group. And of course, you can make that up through social activities and clubs and recreation, sports, and all of that. So not a big deal, but just a factor. Um, Individualization versus standardization is another aspect, meaning because it allows for the personalized individual learning experience, some people or some parents may struggle to ensure that the needs are met from a benchmark standpoint or from an educational standpoint. And what I mean by that is that there's so many approaches to homeschooling, meaning some people on school, which means they just pull their kids out of school, and some people do more like an interest-led approach. So they'll say, okay, my kids are interested in insects today, so we're going to go to the park and learn hands-on about insects. Or someone may do a unit study where they're learning about the seasons, or they're learning about maybe the apple, the stem, the core, and all of that. So in terms of standardization, what they would have learned on day 3 in grade 2, they're probably not going to meet those standards, but that's the flexibility and the beauty of it. It really is based on what matters to you. Another piece I would talk about is freedom versus structure. And I would say personally, this is the one that I struggle with the most because I want the freedom to say, hey, we're going to guitar lessons today, we're going to swim class today. And I want the freedom to say, we're not going to work on this and we're not going to do that, but you still need that structure where you say, okay, so we need to make sure that we get in X amount of time or X amount of hours or whatever that looks like. So because it offers the flexibility in choosing what you want to learn when they want to learn, you have to make sure that you have a structure that you're actually getting things done that you have decided are important. The teacher-student dynamic, or maybe I should really say the mom-teacher dynamic or the parent-teacher dynamic, that's something that can be a little bit tough to navigate, right? Because once you have on your school hat, you have to realize that you're still the parent, and how you navigate those challenges or disagreements is really an opportunity for you to model character and love and all of these things that a traditional teacher wouldn't have to worry about because they leave the classroom, they go home. But when your kids leave the classroom, they are home. So that's something to think about. But what I love, love, love is the preparation for the real world. My kids will come to so many different activities with me, whether it's me speaking on a panel or me attending a conference, or they're seeing what my world looks like as an adult. They do some domestic things at home. So they know how to use the washing machine. They know how to use the dryer. They know how to wash dishes. They know how to load the dishwasher. They know how to do all these things. And had they been in a more traditional setting when they got home with their ton of homework and all these other activities, I don't know that I would have prioritized that learning. And maybe for rushing in the mornings, I would have been more flexible in things that they need to do. But now my husband has implemented a structure where in the morning, there are 4 principles or things that they have to do every morning, and they have to do it in that order to create a system. So I think that's really useful and really helpful. So what I love is thinking about frameworks and really understanding that if you have anchors and you know why you're doing something, whenever it becomes difficult, this is when you run back to your framework or your philosophy or mission or your vision for why you're doing something. And that's what you use as an anchor, right? So whenever it feels hard or it's becoming hard, I would say go back to your why. Why did you do it, right? Or maybe reevaluate your approach. So if you're feeling that you need a strategy, maybe you can consider whether the teaching method that you're applying or the curriculum that you're using or the schedule needs adjustment. And that's where the flexibility is an advantage of homeschooling, so you can adapt. Another thing I would say is seek support. When, connect with other people. It doesn't have to be a homeschooling family. It could just be someone who you can talk to and say, this is really, really hard. I don't know if I did the right thing, but just talking to someone who can then remind you of your why and say, hey, but you said you wanted to do this, and it wasn't just the academic piece. You wanted to do it for fill in the blank, for the spiritual component, for the character development, for the behavior modification, for the recreational aspirations, for whatever it is. You decided for a reason. Go back to that reason when it feels hard. Sometimes it's just as simple as taking a break. You know, if you're starting to feel overwhelmed, your child getting frustrated, the break can really help with preventing burnout and just giving each other a chance to recharge. I think that's really important because a lot of times we have this mentality to just push through, go, go, go. And it may not be the best option in that moment. Sometimes you need to just push through, but other times maybe you just really need to take a break. Another thing I would say is to make sure that you're exploring different resources. If you're doing everything traditional, paper, worksheet, book, grades, and you find that that's not working, try something that gets the same outcome, but it's a different approach. So that could be an educational game, maybe an online platform, interactive hands-on learning, um, so many different things. So I would say if you're realizing that the black and white textbook is not working, it may even be, let me give you a color copy from a prettier resource, right? Um, and that sounds trivial, but the way people's brain works is different. So for someone, the black and white page may be okay. Someone needs to see the color jumping off and the graphics or the cartoon or whatever it is, but try different things, see what works. And also, you know, you can delegate responsibilities not only to different family members, but to siblings. They can teach each other, or you can even flip the role where you introduce a concept and then they become the teacher and they get to teach you. You know, they put on that teacher hat, and that really shows that they have learned because now they can not only regurgitate information, but share the concept and teach you. So then you know that they've really mastered what you're trying to teach. So, you know, it's just definitely the importance of evaluating your goals, reevaluating your goals, adjusting them, and also, you know, just taking care of yourself. Because as home-centered educators, we wear the role of parent and teacher, and we're also student because we're reading our education as well, but we're the principal, we're the counselor. And if you're a mom, there are like 20 other roles on top of that. You're probably the nurse, you're the chef, you're all these other things. The dad is also playing a role too. Maybe he's the Uber driver, maybe you're the Uber driver, like whatever. But there's so many roles that we play. And the reason I'm sharing this is because there may be a time where you're like, why am I doing this? Am I crazy? Why did I do this? I can't do this. I don't want to do this anymore. And whenever you feel like this, I want you to recognize that it's completely normal for us to sometimes feel overwhelmed and question whether the decision we made, not only for home-centered education, but in general, just to question whether the decision we made was the right decision, especially when we're taking on multiple roles simultaneously. So you wake up in the morning and you're like, okay, I need to start classes, but I also need to make breakfast and I also need to clean the house and I need to drop the baby off and I need to do all of these different things. I don't know where we're dropping the baby off because my baby's home with me, but you know, like all these different things that you're doing. So it's okay to acknowledge that there's a challenge and then seek support. So if you're ever in the place where you're thinking, am I enough? I want to remind you that you are enough. There's always going to be a family that's doing something different and it may seem better. There's always going to be a student who's ahead of your child. There's going to be a student who's behind your child, whatever behind means. But I want to remind you that you are enough and it's okay to ask for help. And it's okay to not only okay, it's important to recognize and celebrate your efforts and your achievements. Celebrate those wins. But again, reflect on your reasons because there's an initial motivation that can keep you anchored. Why did you decide to do this? Because if your reason was for spiritual development and now you're focusing so heavily on the academic piece, you're out of alignment. And that's why you're feeling frustrated because your goals are not even matching up, right? So definitely just give yourself grace and remember that it's okay to change course if necessary. If you're making a decision based on what you believe is best for you and your family, it's okay to change course, whether you say, I'm going to switch from doing this at 9 o'clock in the morning to 1 p.m. It's okay for you to say, I'm going to take Mondays off and just do Tuesdays through Fridays. It's okay for you to say, I'm going to do 3 days a week, 4 days a week. You get to make that choice, but give yourself grace and the ability to make that decision, and the ability to take a break, and the ability to make adjustments, and just give yourself grace to change course, whatever that means, if necessary. And I want you to set realistic expectations and goals. So what I mean by that is prep, plan, prep, plan again, get organized and stay organized. And the reason I say that is because there are some times when you feel so wired and ready to go, and then something so tiny will derail you. It may be that you're missing the book that you need to be working through. It may be that you can't find your supplies. It may be that you're doing science and you can't find the science kit. So when you set your house in order, whether it means knowing where the things are, putting them where they belong, creating your lesson plan, or using a curriculum that offers you the option to wing it because it's scripted or it lays everything out, just really organize. So set SMART goals where they're specific and you can measure them. Don't just set a goal that says, teach my kids to read. That is a big multi-month goal. But if you say, I want to get my kid from level A to level B, or from Lexile 100 to Lexile 300, or from reading CBC cat, hat, bat to reading four-letter words, right? If you set goals are measurable, then it's easier to check to see if you're meeting those milestones. And I want you to understand your child's pace, recognizing that they're individuals and they may not learn the way you learn, the way their sibling learns, the way their friends learn, and that is okay. Um, and consider your own limitations, right? Consider that you're limited on time, you have different constraints, and maybe you have a goal that says you want to accomplish something, but when you really look back at it, it's not measurable. So, some of us dropped our corporate hat to engage in home-centered education. Don't forget some of the things that worked. SMART goals. Is it specific? Is it measurable? Is it achievable? Right? It looks good on paper, but is this really a realistic goal? Is it relevant? Does it matter that your three-year-old knows how to do grade 2 math problems? Is that relevant? Maybe not. And then you want to talk about the time. How long does it take? What are the deadlines for accomplishing these goals? Create a time frame that creates a sense of urgency, but also gives you the space and the help in planning. So again, prep, plan again, prep. Whether it's the weekly lessons or just gathering the resources or creating a dedicated learning space or not, right? Maybe it's today we're at the mall in the nice comfy chairs, tomorrow we're at the park, tomorrow we're at the beach. Whatever works for you, make sure that you figure it out so you're not always flustered trying to figure things out. Stay organized, get organized. Use a planner, give your kid a planner if they're old enough. Make sure that your storage and organization actually helps, where you can say, look in the red believe box and grab a pencil. Or you can say, look in the blue bag that's supposed to be on the blue chair, right? Make sure that you have things organized. Or maybe it's folders, maybe it's digital tools, right? Where you can find it on the computer, you can find it electronically, binge, self-storage, whatever it is, do all the things you need to do so that on those days when it does feel hard, you are at least ahead of the game. And then just remember that it's a dynamic process and it's okay to adapt and refine as you continue to go through this experience and this journey with your child. I think it's also important to recognize that you don't want to make permanent decisions on temporary feelings. So recognize if you're just having a bad day. You may be in a space where like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't want to do this anymore. But acknowledging that you're having a challenging day is crucial, especially in the context of home-centered education. So be self-aware. If you know that you need to operate on 6 hours of sleep to get anything done, don't try to do it on 4 hours of sleep. Don't try to do it on 2 hours of sleep or no sleep. That's when you give yourself grace and you say, you know what, I know I have to do this, but I'm going to shift this goal slightly because I know I'm not going to be my best and I'm not going to be the best version of myself for my kids. So for the sake of everyone here, let me give myself a break. Let me give myself an hour. Let me give myself a day, whatever that looks like. But it requires you to be self-aware, right? It requires you to pause and reflect and say, okay, I really want to take this day off, and it may mean that I need to shift by 1 day, 2 days, or whatever, but is it worth it in the long run? Or if I take this time off, does it really mean that it derails the whole plan? Maybe not, right? So just communicating with your kids, keeping them organized, you making sure that you stay organized, And just remember that it's a journey, it has ebbs and flows, and it's normal to face challenges. And taking care of yourself and your well-being is completely essential, and it creates a positive learning for you and your kids. So if you're feeling that's a hard day and you've already checked to see, is it just am I just having a bad day because something is going on? What I would say is think about your kid and think if the expectation's realistic. Here's what I mean by that. You know that your kid has the ability to sit still and they're not sitting still. Did you guys just bake and you gave them a ton of sugar and now you're wondering why they're not sitting still? Are they completely exhausted because the night before they went skiing or to the beach or to some hardcore activity and they are exhausted? Is life happening? Maybe something happened in the family and you're like, I just have to stay focused. And you're trying to have them push through with their emotional things that they need to deal with, right? Maybe it's the loss of a loved one or you're grieving or something is happening as a family and you're just trying to push through. That's not fair to the kid and it's not a realistic expectation, right? So we also want to make sure that there's empathy. And I think just the length of this podcast episode and just the 2,000 tips that I've already thrown at you shows why home center education can be difficult because there's so many moving parts and there's so many different dynamics that you have to factor in as a result to their individual differences, their developmental stage, their learning style, their physical well-being, right? Are they do they have any limitations or disabilities? What are the environmental distractions? What's going on outside? What's going on in the house? Communication. Are you able to clearly express what you want to express and you're wondering why they're not capturing it? And it's because you're not sharing it in a way that they can actually receive it. So again, just adjusting expectations, balancing the structure and the flexibility, taking breaks when you need it, giving them breaks when they need it, and even incorporating interest. Just remember that each day is unique and there are various factors that can influence a child's ability to meet expectations. So by approaching every day with understanding and love and grace and patience and flexibility, and to focus in your child's well-being because they're not just a brain to be taught, they're your child. They're before, the relationship is more important than everything else. So create a supportive learning environment and just understand that sometimes it may be hard, but it's completely worth it. And give yourself space and time and grace to reevaluate and to pivot and to tweak and to plan, prep. So in summary, is homeschooling hard? It can be. The fact that it's hard doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. Absolutely not. What are some things to do when it becomes hard? Replay this video and take 5 of the 200 ones I just gave you. But to summarize, take breaks, give yourself grace, create a strategy and a system that's supportive of learning and it fosters a good environment, and make sure that you have a support system and just really hone in on what works for you and lean into the flexibility that it offers. Create structure, but not necessarily routine, so that you have something as an anchor. You have systems and structure and strategies in place that will help to anchor you. And most importantly, remember your why. You decided to do this for a reason. If it was a moment of insanity, then maybe you need to reevaluate. But if you made this decision with a clear head, I pray that you will stick through it and that you'll feel encouraged and that you will use resources, whether it's virtual resources like Rose Resource Room or all your friends who are here to support you like CHAP and HSLDA. So I just pray for peace and grace and that you'll feel that you're doing the right thing for you and your family and you'll continue to do what you feel that you're called to do. So like always, share with me what works for you, tips, tools, what resonated, and I can't wait to hear from you.